Chelsea. I live in Texas. I was a math educator for 8 years prior to joining Mind. I used ST Math in my own classroom. So everything I'm going to be sharing today is from my real life classroom experience. It's relevant, it's practical, and my goal is that you leave today with some things that you can easily implement with your teachers this school year and then moving into next school year. I also share tons of math teacher content through social media. I'm pretty passionate about helping math educators. My handle is Will Teach for Tacos if you want to follow me over on Instagram. And then just mostly because I'm curious, I'd love if you drop in the chat just who you are and what your role is in your district, just so I can kind of keep you in mind and how you support your teachers as I'm presenting. I want to make sure that it's going to be relevant for you. So let me know who you are and what you do in your campus or district. And I do have the chat open, so hopefully I will. And I know Candace is going to help me catch things as they come through. Awesome. Perfect. And that's what I was mostly curious about. I wanted to see if we had, teachers in the room, if we had people supporting math teachers, administrators. Awesome. Okay, so lots of interventionist, curriculum coordinator, instructional coach. Perfect. Keep those coming because I'm looking at them on the side. We'll see how good I do at my multitasking. Here's kind of what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to be looking at just kind of the components of a math block, especially when stations are involved, and then talking through setting expectations for stations. What is the teacher's job and role during stations? What are the students doing? And then kind of troubleshooting some common pain points of stations. Okay, so we are going to do a little bit of interactive questions. So you can either go to slido.com on your browser, or you can scan that QR code. And I want to know, what are challenges of running math stations? So either from your own classroom experience before you moved into your coaching role, or as you're working with teachers, what are things that they run into? You can also drop them in the chat as well, if that's easier. I'll give you a second to respond to that. And the goal is that hopefully today we're able to talk through and provide some solutions for some of those challenges that you're seeing. Yes. So classroom management, and I feel like some of those things go along with that, right? So students being engaged, having control of the classroom, managing your time, a lot of that kind of falls under that umbrella of classroom management. Students with different needs, staying on task, student behavior. Awesome. Okay, well, hopefully some of the things we're going to talk about, address some of those. And if they don't, we should have some time at the end for Q&A, but I also put /brainstorming because you guys have just as many ideas and solutions for these things as I do, and probably even more. And so if we have time and are able to, we can also brainstorm with each other on fixing some of these things. Maybe not fixing them, coming up with some solutions to try to fix some of these things. Okay, so we're going to talk really briefly just about some station models, just so we're all kind of coming from the same understanding. And, if I say certain things, we all have the same kind of groundwork for that. So there are literally hundreds of different ways to do stations. These are just some of the more popular options, or sometimes if teachers come up with their own way, it can still kind of fall under the umbrella of one of these. So we've got must do, may do, a menu or a playlist, and then traditional rotation. So when we say math stations, this is probably traditionally what we think about. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go through some of these. And it may also, if you're not familiar with one of them, it may give you some ideas for something you might encourage a teacher to try out. So for must do, may do, this is when students are given a list of tasks that they must do, and then they are given other options that they may do when they finish the other task. So some of the benefits of this is it gives students choice, which they appreciate. So they have some choice in the order that they work on the must-do items. It gives you as the teacher the ability to group students a little bit more flexibly. You also can be more flexible with the amount of time you spend with each of those groups, with which depending on your own time management could be a good or bad thing. I like to spend a lot of time with some students sometimes, and we, might go over, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility. If you've got a group that needs a little bit longer with you and a group that just needs a quick check-in, you have the flexibility to do that. The other benefit is that your early finishers are built in to the system. You don't have to come up with something new. Those may dos are your early finishers. And then things to keep in mind are the level of independence for students, which I feel like we've seen a decrease in post-COVID, and that's coming from somebody that taught post-COVID. And it kind of goes along with some of the things y'all were mentioning as challenges. So something to consider with this type of model is how independent students are able to be. It's just less structured overall. And then how are we going to keep students accountable and check in with them as they're working, because it's less structured and they have to be more independent. And then, if you're using this type of model, then ST Math has got to be on the must-do list. So you might give students a set number of puzzles to complete, a set objective to complete, a certain amount of time they have to be on, but it can't just be the may do, or we're just leaving it up to chance if students get on or not. So if you're using this type of model, ST Math has got to be on the must-do list. And then the next one is a menu or a playlist style. This is similar to must do, may do. So typically students are given a list of tasks and sometimes choice on which task they complete. They get to choose the order of the task and maybe don't have to do all of the task. And then this is usually completed not in just one day. It's usually completed over the course of a few days or the whole week. Some of the benefits of this are, again, your students have choice, have a little bit more control in what they're doing. As a teacher, it gives you more flexibility in who you're pulling and how long you're pulling them for. Again, you don't have to worry about early finishers because your playlist would have enough activities on it that you don't have students who finish everything. And the other thing is that you only have to prep once a week because you're prepping for multiple days at once and multiple activities, which also could be something to consider if you don't like having to do bulking your work that way and getting everything ready for the entire week. It can feel like a lot sometimes. So things to consider are, again, your student level of independence, it's less structured, and how are we going to make sure students are actually getting through the work and doing it well. So the last one is traditional stations, which I feel like when people think of math stations, this is what they think of. And so I've done every type of math station that I could think of. I've tried them all out. In the last few years, this is the one I landed on just because I found that students were needing more structure. I needed more structure. So this is where students are, they sit at groups and rotate on a set amount of time. Like it's what I feel like people picture when you think of math stations. So it's more structured, it's more timed. Students sit there for a certain amount of time and then go to the next activity all at the same time. And so the teacher can be a station, they can be separate and pull from the stations. Some of the benefits are the structure that it provides. The transitions between stations kind of serve as quick resets, quick brain breaks for students. It does help a lot with time management, and it can be done as a standalone day. So we can do stations all 5 days, we can do stations once a week, we can do stations twice a week. There's a little bit more flexibility in that it can be just done on its own for a day without having to do it every single day. And then some of the things to consider are your student groups can be a bit more static if you are one of the stations. It doesn't have as much flexibility. Transitions can be a huge downfall if classroom management isn't where it needs to be. And then you've got to plan for if students finish activities early. And then these are just some ideas. I feel like people get really stressed out and hung up on how this needs to look and be presented to students, and there's not any one right way to do it. You don't have to have like the perfect acronym. It doesn't have to be super cute. I love this one that's just written on an anchor chart because it can really be that simple. It just needs to be functional for your students. If it's cute and you like that, that's great, but it doesn't have to be. So the main thing is what's going to make the most sense for each classroom. And you might be at a school where there's 40 different classrooms and all 40 of them are doing stations a different way, and that's fine. The main thing is the goal is we are meeting with small groups. That's why we're doing stations. And so if we aren't meeting with students in small groups, why are we doing stations? So just know that you might walk into every classroom and see it look different based on the needs of that classroom, the grade level for that classroom, that teacher's teaching style, but how are they pulling small groups and making that work? Okay, so setting expectations, which I feel like was what most of you guys responded with as far as what gives teachers the most trouble with doing stations is classroom management. So this is where that classroom management piece comes in. And you might be wondering, what does this have to do with stations? We recently started potty training our third child. And if you've done any sort of potty training in your life, it works best if if kids, hopefully you're not potty training your students. If kids are given lots of opportunities to go potty. They can't just learn to use the bathroom by reading about it or talking about it, or us just telling them that's what they're supposed to do. They have to do it. So the theme of this conference is everyone learns by doing, and that's exactly how potty training works. We commit a certain amount of time to staying home, 2 to 3 days. We don't go anywhere. We give her lots and lots of juice so that she has lots and lots of chances to go to the bathroom successfully. And we praise, praise, praise. So the same thing's going to happen with stations. We are going to commit time to rolling them out, which starts with admin giving teachers time to do that. And so that's kind of where y'all's voice really comes into play, is allowing because you guys help make schedules and have input on all of that. So making sure your teachers have time to get these things rolled out so that they can do it over and over again in practice. It becomes second nature. We praise, praise, praise when students meet the expectations that we have set up with them. And so it made me think of potty training my daughter. So we want to make sure that we have time to slowly roll out these routines and procedures and give students plenty of time to learn by doing. A lot of times teachers feel the pressure to immediately jump into teaching content, and that is where classroom management falls apart. And so it doesn't really matter if you're teaching math super, super well and you know your content really, really well. If your classroom is chaos, students aren't learning. And I volunteer in classrooms pretty regularly. And this is something I've started to realize in the classrooms I've been in. We spend a lot of time training teachers how to be good math teachers or whatever their content is. But like I said, it doesn't matter if your content is super solid, if your classroom management is a mess. So if you don't take anything else away from this session, please, please, please use your power and voice to build in time for your teachers to establish those routines and procedures for that classroom and make it the expectation that, the first 3 days of school or the first 5 days of school, that's what you're doing. We don't expect you to teach a lot of heavy math content. And then, once we get those routines and procedures in place, reviewing those often after long breaks. And then lastly, if something's not working, don't be afraid to try something new, even if it's mid-year. It's never too late to try something new, especially if what you're doing is not going well. Okay, we've got another poll here. So we talked about classroom management being kind of where things go wrong. So what are routines and procedures that students need to be familiar with before everything can run smoothly? So when you walk in a classroom and stations are happening, what are things that we would expect or need students to be doing or teachers to be doing? I'm gonna give you a second because it says people are typing. Feel free to type in the chat as well if that is easier. Getting materials, how to get help if they're stuck. Transitions. I'm trying to figure out why your answers are, or maybe people are just still typing. I just want to make sure I give people time to respond. I was a teacher, so I've got pretty good wait time. Thank you, those of you that are responding in the comments. I'm trying to figure out why they're not coming through on here. Oh, it's because I need to click next slide. It's just me, guys. Okay, there we go. all me. What to do if they get stuck, where to find items, how to get help. Okay, a lot of these are kind of along the same lines. How to get help, what to do when they get stuck, know where to go next, materials they need, how to work independently, what to do if they need something and the teacher is busy. Okay, perfect. So I'm not going to spend as much time on this as I would if I was talking to mostly teachers. When I present this to teachers, we go through this whole rollout plan. And I feel like it's something that teachers haven't really fully thought through. Every time we talk about this, it seems to be a big aha for people. So the main idea behind this is we're slowly rolling out the things we're expecting from students. So essentially we're going to, have a discussion about a specific routine or procedure or expectation. And then the next few days, we'll still talk about it, but we'll also practice doing it. So we'll practice being at stations and practice what it looks like, what it's going to sound like over and over again so that it just becomes second nature for them. They learn by doing it. They can't learn just by being told this is how we're going to do stations. So those first couple days, we would actually sit at our tables, pretend we're working on something, get up and move. And if we do it wrong, we would start over and do it again because we're going to practice doing things correctly. And it took me, I have 10 days here, a full 10 days to get stations rolled out at a level where I felt comfortable getting started with actual math content. Now, most of the days didn't take the whole class period, but we did spend some portion of the class period talking about stations and practicing stations, and then doing our regular math lesson. I know we can't just teach stations for 2 weeks, but we talked about it, practiced it, and then did our math work. So set the expectation, give your teachers time to do this, especially if you're putting out the expectation that you guys have got to be doing stations, you've got to be doing small groups, then make sure that the other expectation is also that they roll it out some way and are given the time to do so. Anchor charts are just a great way to have a reference for students when needed. The big thing is to build these with students. So they come up with the words that go on these charts, which is great because I will tell them, you told me that during stations I was going to see XYZ. Like, you guys are the ones that came up with that. So show me that. I'm not the one who came up with these things, students did, and I just recorded it and facilitated that conversation, but they help establish the expectations just as much as the teacher does. Okay, this is just some ideas for how, the math block might be scheduled depending on how much time you have. I'm not going to read this in entire quote, but the gist of it is you don't have to do stations every day, or you don't have to do whatever your preferred lesson format is every single day. It doesn't have to look the same. Now, there should be some things that are consistent. Our students like when they come in the classroom and they know what's going to be expected. But as far as the actual format of the lesson goes, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. We're going to do what makes the most sense for our students and for the lesson that we're teaching. So the end part says effective teachers use more than one lesson format. And I think that that's really important. I, as a teacher, got really hung up on trying to do stations every single day, and that can be really overwhelming. So knowing when to do stations and when to do whole group is really important. If you've got shorter math blocks, there may be certain types of station models that work better for that. And just remember, you don't have to do stations every single day. I taught math once in a 55-minute math block, which to me seemed way too short, but we still did math stations. I would just, on the days we did math stations, that's all we did. And we didn't do them every single day. So just going back to that quote, whatever you decide to do, it doesn't have to be every single day. Be willing to try out a new, station format, try something new and make it work for what you got. So 90 minutes was always ideal for me, but I know not everybody has that amount of time for math class. I mean, if I had my way, we would just teach math all day long, and I would just get to keep the kids all day. So these are just some ideas for how the math block might be broken up. It's definitely still possible to do some variations of stations in a shorter math block. Might do less stations, maybe instead of doing 4 stations, you only do 2 or 3. I've also seen like just a half and half where you teach half the class in small group, the other class does a station, and then you flip flop. There's lots of ways to make it work regardless of how much time you have. So we're going to look a little bit about what the teacher's role is. We're going to look at kind of both moving parts, the teachers and the students. So we're going to look at the teacher first, and then we will look kind of at what students are doing during this time. In the previous slide, we talked about scheduling the math block, and each one of those had a warm-up time. So this might be like an independent bell ringer type warm-up, or it might be something that's more like a mini lesson. So let's chat through kind of what that might look like and what the teacher's role is in that. I always like to preface this by saying I was never a mini lesson person. And I feel like when people think of math stations, they think of you've got to have a mini lesson, like that's the right way to do it. And it just never worked for me. My mini lesson always ended up not mini. I would get up there and we would just talk. And so I just like to put that disclaimer because there's a lot of right ways to do stations, and having a mini lesson is just one way. So these are just some tips for having a successful mini lesson if that is something that teachers are going to be doing. So making sure we set a timer and sticking with it. Not trying to do, 10 problems, picking just a few problems and digging really deeply into those. And then asking yourself, if I do one more problem. So sometimes we get this mindset. I mean, it's just like when we, played sports, the coach would say, let's just do it one more time. And then one more time turned into 50 more times. And so just thinking to yourself, if I do this one more problem, like, are all of them going to get it? And the truth of the matter is, if you're sitting in a whole group and you're on a short amount of time, not all the students are going to get it, period. They're just not. It's not going to happen because strugglers hide in the whole group, but are exposed in the small group. And I can't remember where that quote was from. I think it was just a math director I was talking to, but I was like, wow, that is so true. So the whole group can be important, but we've got to get to those small group kids. That's when you're going to be able to look into their faces and see if they're like, are you with me or are you lost? You can see it in their eyes if they're understanding. And so, and that was part of the reason I didn't ever do a mini lesson, because I just felt like so many of my kids were not getting it in the whole group. And I knew in the small groups I could capture their attention and make sure that they were with me and understanding. And so that's where we're going to find and fill those gaps. And it's the reason I'm obsessed with teaching in stations, and I'm going to always advocate for getting in those small groups. So I mentioned to you guys I was not ever a mini lesson person, but I do like to start with some type of whole group warm-up. So technically speaking, any sort of teacher-led facilitated warm-up could be considered your mini lesson. So I just want to give you some ideas for warm-ups you might use moving into stations. So we're going to talk a little bit about number talks and puzzle talks, which I believe in the last breakout session, there was a session on puzzle talks. So hopefully you got to go to that. So in a number talk, a teacher presents a problem. The students solve the problem, usually independently. Sometimes they use these different hand signals to signify where they are in their thinking and solving of the problem. And then they share their answers and their thinking to go along with those answers. And then as a class, we come up with what the real solution is. And a lot of this is usually with the teacher documenting students' thinking and what their answers were. And then in a puzzle talk, it's going to be very similar. So instead of the teacher sharing a problem, the teacher is going to pull up an ST math puzzle. Students are going to solve the puzzle independently and then be given time to share their answers along with their thinking to how they got that answer. And then we're going to try it out. Now, the best thing about this is that when we try it out, we get that proof. So we get to try and watch what happens through those animations in ST Math. So even if we were to try out the incorrect answer, we still get that feedback and can make adjustments. So then not only are we getting students to talk to each other, we're now modeling that problem-solving process as well. And then just some resources. So in ST Math, and I always like to share this because this was something as a teacher I didn't know existed. So hopefully there's someone in here that you're like, wow, I never saw that before. And this is brand new for you and it's going to change your life. So we've got two different options that are already available for you for puzzle talk. So we have puzzle talk planners that you can use with essentially any puzzle in ST Math. And I will, let's see if I can get everything to work the way I want it to. I will drop that in the chat. And that is just blank. So this is just something to help your teachers think through their questioning, think through what puzzle they're going to put and kind of where it fits into, where each question fits into the problem solving process. But there are also scripted puzzle talks. So if you are new to ST Math, new to puzzle talks, these will tell you the questions you need to ask, what you need to pull up, what you need to be looking for in students. So these are super helpful if you have teachers who have never done a puzzle talk before. And I will put that in the chat as well. And I was hoping, yes. So I was hoping we would have a little bit of time so you could go ahead and click into that. So if you want to go ahead and click in, maybe find a grade level that you most often support, and you can kind of look through some of those. I have a 4th grade and a 2nd grade one pulled up on the screen. And they've made some major improvements to these. So even if you have seen these before, this is the new format, and there's some things on here that are just so helpful. The puzzles are linked, so you don't have to go searching for which puzzle it's talking about. There's a link for the puzzle. And then the game in a minute video is also linked, which is super helpful for your teachers to look at beforehand, so they kind of know the way the puzzle's going to work, especially on some of those more tricky puzzles. As far as choosing what to use as a puzzle talk, I always chose either a puzzle that a lot of my students were getting stuck on, or I was getting a lot of alerts for, or a puzzle that had to do with the skill that we were teaching. So then, I mean, it really is a mini lesson if it has to do with whatever the skill is that you are teaching. You're just using ST Math and this tool you have and these online manipulatives you have readily available, which is going to make your life so much easier. So hopefully you had a chance to click in there. How much time do you spend on number talk? So this definitely, if it's going to be like your mini lesson, would probably, let's see, let me go back to, oh, I shouldn't do it that way. That's so silly. I won't go back over there. I was going to go back to the planning your math block. I would say between 10, no more than 15 minutes, probably 10 would be better. It's really going to depend on how much time, how long your math block is, and then how much time you're planning to spend at stations. So I would kind of base it off of that. The other nice thing about Puzzle Talks is you could use these in your teacher table as well. So you could use Puzzle Talks when you are pulling students as your lesson with your small group. And that could be more focused on what those specific students need. So continuing with kind of our role as the teacher, this is your teacher table, small group time, whatever you want to call it. And really remember, the purpose of doing stations is to pull these small groups. So whether your teacher is pulling groups or she's one of the rotations, having those groups and conferencing with students is crucial. So also sometimes teachers don't pull groups. Maybe students are working at stations and the teacher is going to the station and working with students there. So there's lots of ways this could look. But just some tips for that is, we can pull groups based on student needs. Teacher table can be used as your pre-teach. It can be used to review something or extend something depending on the groups you are pulling. And then make sure that we are planning that time intentionally, especially so that if we are seeing groups not on a set schedule, so kind of planning out in your mind based on how long you have, how much time you're going to spend with each group. It can be a follow-up to the mini lesson. So say you did a puzzle talk as your mini lesson, and maybe you are continuing that at your small group table. And then the last one is a big one, and it was one that a lot of you guys mentioned as one of the challenges of stations. So you got to know it's okay to step away from teacher table. A lot of times we see, for a while, it was real popular to wear like one of those little crowns, or to have like a little light that like signified your other students couldn't talk to you. You were at small group, don't talk to me. I can't help you with anything. And I understand the purpose of that, but I also think it's important, like, if students are 15 minutes with you at teacher table and 45 minutes away from you, that's a long time for, an 8-year-old to not have any sort of guidance from an adult. So it's important to know it's okay for you to step away from teacher table. So these are some ideas to help minimize interruptions at teacher table while still giving students any help or attention they need when they're not with you. So one idea would be to have them write their name on a sticky note and have them come put it on your teacher table desk. So that way, when you get a free moment, that's someone you need to go check on. They have a question or need your attention or whatever it might be. Another idea would be to give the small group some kind of warm-up task. So I love these. That middle's a game called 24 game. It's like a quick fluency game. You could have them practice reading numbers. You could have them doing, fact fluency, but giving them something to do so you're able to get up, go check on all your other groups, make sure they're good to go, make sure they know what they're doing before you get back to your small group. And then also just making sure that the station students are doing when they're away from you are things that are familiar, the directions aren't complicated. It's things that students are going to know how to do, not necessarily the content, but as far as like how the station is supposed to work. And then just know students are going to need you at some point. So make a plan for it, expect it. And I feel like expecting that they're going to interrupt you and need you and just preparing yourself for that is the most helpful thing. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about, we talked about what the teacher's doing. Now we're going to switch over and talk about what students are doing. So I have a video linked here. We're not going to watch it, but it talks about the performance zone versus the learning zone. And neither one is bad. As adults, we switch back and forth between the two regularly. That's how we get better at things. And we can't expect students to improve in math if they are constantly working in the performance zone. So if they are just working to finish a task, to get right answers, that is all performance zone, and it doesn't allow students to learn anything new or grow. My husband was a football coach, so we've spent lots of time on the football field. I live in Texas. We love our football. So a football game would be your performance zone. That is where the skills that we practice need to happen. It's high stakes. Mistakes can be really costly. But you know what happens after the game? Film. Coaches watch and break down the film. Players watch the film. To prepare to be in the learning zone. So what are the skills that we need to develop and practice? What were the mistakes we made and how do we fix those when the stakes are low? Students should be spending most of their station time working in the learning zone. The stakes should be low, mistakes should be expected. We're going to use those mistakes to learn and adjust. Sounds a lot like ST Math. So working in the learning zone at stations is so important, getting frequent feedback with repetition. So with ST Math, obviously that's easy. That feedback is built in. When they make mistakes, they get the feedback. It's embedded. So we have to be a little bit creative when we're thinking of our other stations. So technology station, that feedback's taken care of. Teacher table, that feedback's taken care of. How do we provide that same like opportunity at whatever our other stations are going to be? So I like things like self-checking activities. I'm a big fan of just handing students the answer key. Takes the pressure off. They're no longer performing just to get the right answer. They have the right answers because we gave them to them, and now they just have to prove it and do the work to go along with it. So we're going to take a look at some different types of stations. The main thing is you don't have to have a fancy acronym. You can, but it's not a requirement. We just want to make sure that we are choosing activities that are going to be valuable for students. So this is anything that takes place while the teacher is seeing small groups. They are independent of the teacher, but they don't have to be independent. So they're without an adult, but students can still be talking to each other and doing things in groups. The information should not be new. That is going to cause the teacher a lot of headaches. And then for me, having a balance of sound was incredibly important. So we always had two stations that were, we called them talking stations, and two stations that were silent stations. So that made sure we still were giving students opportunities to have mathematical discussions. But for my own sanity, I needed some of the stations to be quiet so that, you know, we had a good sound level in the classroom. Students at teacher table could still hear me. So that's kind of, we just had a balance. Some of the stations you were expected to talk and some you were not. I am going to read this quote because I love it so much, which if you don't follow Donna Boucher at Math Coaches Corner, she is phenomenal. It says, note that as you move away from whole group instruction, students are spending increasingly longer amounts of time working independently. In fact, they might even be spending the bulk of their instructional block working in workstations. So think about the implications of that statement. We don't want stations to be a waste of time for them. For us, it's not busy work. It's things that they are learning from, and it's got to be intentional. As you're planning stations, these are things to consider as far as what to put at the stations. So we can have them practicing something that is current, that we are presently teaching and working on. We can have them reviewing past skills. So that might be, you know, place value, fact fluency, or just a skill that we've already taught and they're comfortable doing. We can also have them getting ready for what we're going to be teaching. Obviously in a way that is going to be, they're not going to get stuck. They're going to still know what to do next. So this is another place where I feel like ST Math super comes in handy. This is where I would use that future type station. So assigning something students that you're going to be teaching in the next couple weeks, because of the way ST Math is scaffolded, they should still be able to get started and work on it, even if it's something you haven't taught yet. So these are a couple different stations you might use. These are the ones that I used. I had a technology station, a practice station, and a game station. And then I was the fourth station at teacher table. So for technology, this is an ST Math conference. So, you know, ST Math is a great choice for your technology station. Obviously, there are many others, but the main thing to consider is that they've got to be spending the majority of their time doing math. So not changing their avatar, not wandering around worlds, waiting on a partner to answer a question. And yes, I'm digging at other math programs because I've used them all, but just evaluate when you're deciding what program to use for stations, what are students actually spending their time doing? And then technology is also a super easy place to differentiate because regardless of what the program is you're using, there's typically a way to adjust based on student needs or make assignments based on what you are teaching. One of the things you guys mentioned at the beginning was accountability. So especially at Technology Station, making sure that we are holding students accountable. And so one of the ways to do that would be maybe to set some goals or have them track what they are doing. Also be mindful of where this station is taking place. So for me, Technology Station was always students sitting on the floor with their screens facing wherever I was sitting at teacher table. So that meant I could still be working with my teacher table small group while still being able to monitor and see what my students were doing. If I had, any friends who needed even more extra accountability, they would literally come sit right underneath me at teacher table. And so that was always helpful for, technology. It's easy to, accidentally get on another screen or have another tab open. So that kind of helped get rid of that issue. And then again, differentiating through making assignments. And so I was going to, this link is only going to work, I think, if you are logged in, but I'm going to go ahead and drop it anyways. You can find assignments through STMath. You can search by objective, you can literally just type in fractions in the bar and it'll pull up all the things that have to do with fractions, search by grade level, you can search by your standards. So there's lots of easy ways to quickly find what you're needing and then assign it to your students. So there's going to be, you can play it and that's how you would do your puzzle talk. And then the button next to it says assign and you can assign it to either the whole class or to just individual students. And then for practice station, this is something typically that we've already taught, students already know how to do and can confidently work through. We don't want students spending, 10, 15 minutes at a station practicing something wrong. And then consider the length of the assignments. We want most students finishing in the time that is given. I don't like keeping up with unfinished work. We don't want our teachers having to deal with that. And so the way to not have to do that is make sure that most of your students finish. So keep in mind, that idea of going deep with a few problems rather than just doing a ton of problems. And then also, even though it's not your technology station, we can still do digital activities. Oh, I think I sent, we'll go back to that. Okay. And I'm getting close to time, so we're gonna keep going. And then for game station, it doesn't have to actually be a game. You can call anything a game. But the main thing is that students have got to spend more time doing math than on the game. So kind of like with our technology station, we want to make sure that students aren't just playing, they're actually practicing and learning math. So you can use, game boards with task cards, math mazes, fluency games. There's all sorts of stuff that we can, I used to tape task cards around the room and call that a game. It wasn't actually a game, but if we call it a game, they believe us. We're going to look real quick at some common pain points and ideas for troubleshooting those. So we talked a little bit about individual accountability and students tracking their own stuff. There's also really great just whole class or whole school trackers for STMath. There's all sorts of cute ones that get shared over on social media all the time. So that is a way. And then helping students kind of break down whatever the weekly goal is. So if you're second grade and up, and we're trying to get those 90 minutes a week on STMath, by Monday, you've got to have 20 minutes. By Tuesday, you've got to have 40 minutes, and helping students chunk that large goal of 90 minutes. And then using, again, this was something as a teacher I did not know about. So these are the journal pages and trackers, and there's lots of ones that are built for different grade levels. So click in there, find one you think would be good to share with a teacher you've been working with based on their grade levels. Some involve more writing. That one in the middle is just coloring in. So that would work really well for our primary grades. Oh, someone said the link didn't work. Maybe Candace, you can, if that link doesn't work, we'll find it and I'll attach it to the slides as well. And then lastly, kind of on the same lines as accountability. Oh, someone said it worked. Okay, good. Good deal. Thank you. So some of the pictures on this slide are reflections related directly to ST Math, and then some are more just reflections on attitudes and how we followed procedures. I love that that one in the middle is digital because it most likely can be easily shared with students, grown-ups, and so kind of an added level of accountability because whoever, your adult is at home is also going to see this reflection of your week for stations. And then just some ways we can support students, specifically those, that maybe have special needs or accommodations or need just extra layers of support to be successful. So we've got, having some sort of math toolbox available for students, them knowing where to get that and having the autonomy to get that themselves as needed. And then having these other tools available like fraction bars, hundreds charts, multiplication charts, whatever it might be they need, so they're able to do the math successfully. And then those icons in the middle, those were just tools I used when I needed to provide oral support for students. So if they are somebody that needs questions read to them, needed directions repeated back to them, this was my way of like multiplying myself. So I would just take a screenshot or take a picture of the worksheet they were working on and then record myself reading it. And they knew they could get that out and listen to me read it, even though I'm over at teacher table. So it made it like there was, more of me to go around. Transitions can be something that just really eats up a lot of time and derails things. So I recommend having something active for students to do while they are cleaning up and getting ready for the next station. So I always liked using multiplication songs. There's lots of different ones out there. There's some that are like super duper old school to nursery rhymes, and there's some that are written to contemporary songs. So there's lots of ones to fit whatever your, teaching style is. But when we were cleaning up and getting ready for the next station, students were expected to be singing these songs, or if you didn't want to sing, I guess, at least be quiet. So that was kind of the point of those. And I think I'm almost to the, let's see. Oh, and then helping your teachers figure out ways to make their life easier. Stations can be a lot of work. It can be a lot of prep. So doing what you can to minimize that for yourself. So using things like the dry erase sleeves, so you don't have to make as many copies. Same thing with whiteboards, not grading everything. Anything at teacher table can literally go in the trash. We did it together. I watched you do it. I don't need to see it again. And so just doing things that, planning digital activities, things that we're going to cut down on teacher prep time. And then having a plan for tech issues, because they always come up, and I don't mind being interrupted to help you with math, but if you interrupt me for help with technology, I probably won't be able to help you. And a lot of the time students can figure all this out themselves. So having some sort of tool for them, having, specific students who are tech helpers, but there's definitely things where they can troubleshoot a lot of that on their own.